Hi, and thank you for watching Missouri Viewpoints, the program dedicated to the civil and informed discussion of the political, social, and economic issues that affect us all. I'm Mike Ferguson, and we're in the Hard Bean Cafe in downtown Grandview. Well, it's an old adage in business and it's an old adage in marketing. Sex sells. It sells a lot. It sells a lot to the tune of multi-billion dollars a year just in the United States. Should the government do something about that? Well, my guest for this week's show says yes. Phillip Cosby is the executive director of the Kansas City branch of the National Coalition for the Protection of Children and Families. Phillip, thank you for being on the program this week.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
Well, let's start off with a little background on the issue itself. You are working to get adult businesses indicted via grand jury throughout the area, primarily in the Kansas City area. What is the update on your efforts, particularly in the counties on the Missouri side of the Kansas City area?
Well, in the last 4 years, I've been pretty active in Kansas, and we have successfully indicted 21 pornography outlets for the crime of promotion of obscenity. Now, the grand jury process is in Kansas by petition. In Missouri, it's a different system where it is up to the judge and the prosecutor as to whether to put the evidence before the courts. As you may know, obscenity is illegal. It is not protected free speech. It is like libel, like slander, like perjury. It does not enjoy the protection of First Amendment free speech. But the Supreme Court did not define for every community what is obscene. It allows for what is called a community standard question or trial. That the evidence is pulled off the shelves of the pornography outlets, put into the courtroom, and if that judge or jury says that is obscene, then the First Amendment protection of erotic speech is lifted and is subject to the fines and the penalties of that state. Missouri and Kansas have such laws that mirror the United States Supreme Court decision on that.
Now, pornography has been around as we know it today really since the Victorian era. I saw a documentary on it just last night on the History Channel. Why now? Why do you think there's an effort now to use the legal process to shut it down?
Well, pornography has most certainly been around. The accessibility, the dynamics of the technology has really changed things ever since Al Gore invented the internet and exacerbated the problem. It is what used to be perhaps on a bottom shelf of a drugstore 30 years ago, then became Main Street, then the internet and cable TV, and now with the iPods and cell phones, no filters, no parental supervision. It is a highly addictive. It draws that men are very visually oriented and drawn into an addiction to pornography, which can lead to even criminal behavior. And that's where the point of the courts and the laws of our land agree that the sex industry has a negative effect on communities. It is a mathematical certainty. It will raise crime. It will increase sexually transmitted diseases. It will increase blight and depreciate property values. Now, the courts care about that a community can protect themselves, not unlike the liquor industry. The courts don't seem to care much that someone would drink all day, but when they get in their car and they go a couple blocks and they kill somebody, then because of that effect of the liquor industry on a community, you can regulate it. The courts see the sex industry the exact same way.
Okay, now along those lines, you mentioned, drinking and going out and harming somebody else. Critics of what you're doing will say, for instance, I don't go to strip clubs, I don't go to adult shops. Why should I or you or the government or the courts tell another adult what they can and cannot have access to in their own home?
The negative effects of the pornography industry is the question here. Does it negatively affect our communities? Now, in Kansas, 1/3 of the inmates in the prison system are in there for sexual crimes, and that's growing. I challenge you tonight, go watch your local news. You'll see that next pedophile, that sexual predator, that next abduction. Something has changed in our culture, and we need to ask the questions about obscenity, criminal behavior, the cause and the effect of the sex industry, our highly sexualized culture, and its negative effects.
I'm going to kind of hit on the same theme here. Now, another argument or a similar argument is that if you're successful in getting adult businesses to be shut down by law and by the courts, we're setting a precedent that we're leaving personal and moral decisions up to the hands of the government, which is fine as long as we have moral people that we agree with in office. Are we risking putting our personal freedoms and community standards and our values up for a vote with this down the road?
Well, it's not a matter of vote. There's a due process that the courts allow a community to examine the evidence. If that community says, for instance, a Mennonite community will have a different community standard than downtown San Francisco. That's what the courts recognize. So every community has the legal right to ask that question of, have we gone too far? Is sex with children okay? Is sex with animals okay? At what point does a community say that's not okay? That the moral fabric of a nation, of a community, of the family unit is being eroded and challenged. That we have to ask some hard questions about personal accountability, most certainly. Everyone makes their own personal choices. But when those choices begin to spill into the community in a negative way, the community has that legal right to examine that and to ask that question, have we gone too far?
Let's go with the definition of obscenity here. Let's kind of go back and forth just a little bit. Obviously, your efforts are aimed at the brick and mortar pornography houses, strip clubs, things like that. Should a convenience store that sells Playboy behind the counter be considered selling obscenity and prosecuted as well? Again,
that is up to the community standard. As the Supreme Court judge says, I can't tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it. And if that community deems that magazine, the pornography that is so prevalent today is not your Playboy 30 years ago. This is not harmless fun. This is porn on crack. This stuff is increasingly debased in its content and just very perverse in its nature. And people have no idea of the open sewers that are being poured into their communities. But when you do take it into the courtroom and examine it in the light of that, communities are increasingly saying, that's obscene, and that's not healthy. That is not a good message or a representation of what sex really is, of intimacy, what it really is.
So the theme that I'm hearing from you is, this is to preserve the family, this is to preserve, the moral integrity, of the communities. If somebody doesn't like the community standard in one area, say the Mennonite community, and they want to move somewhere else, court decisions follow that. Should communities be allowed to say, we're okay with it? If you want to bring in, a porn shop, it's fine with us. And we have about 30 seconds left.
New York City is probably the biggest example of where Times Square was overrun with the sex industry, and zoning laws moved those industries into industrial areas. That's an example of the reverse happening. The big cities have eaten the bitter fruit of this, and now the small communities along the interstates, unfortunately, are inheriting as the sex industry intimidates those small communities and says, we're here and there's nothing you can do about it.
Okay, Phillip, we're out of time. Thank you for being on the program. Be sure to come back next week and watch Missouri Viewpoints. Thanks a lot.